Are you part of Generation Rent? Are you worried about your future ability to buy property? Do you think you will be renting forever? Let me know in the comments below. At this point, it must be clear for everyone to see that people are losing their private property rights, they're being lost all over the world, and your future ability to buy a home is fading away. It's not all doom and gloom out there. If you are in your 20s, 30s or 40s, there still is opportunities out there for you to protect your future, even if you are part of Generation Rent. So make sure you do subscribe to the channel so you can keep learning how to protect yourself into the future. But being real, there is no point waiting for the next property crash to get onto the property ladder. There's just as much chances the prices will rise as much as they'll fall. Affordability is not improving. Building costs are likely to increase year on year for the next few years. Even if there is a slowdown, the likelihood is construction costs will go up by at least 5% per year. In the US, 15% or 1 in every 7 homes was bought by institutional investors last year. And that's not changing anytime soon. One of the biggest investment firms in the world, BlackRock, announced recently in the last few weeks that they raised a record $42 billion last year in capital. And guess what? Most of that is going to end up in property and buying up homes. In Ireland, it's even worse. When you add in housing bodies, the state councils, nearly 50% of all houses bought last year were bought by either the state or institutional investors, leaving only 50% available for private buyers. The Great Reset is well underway. Transfer of private individual properties into institutional investors or the state is well advanced at this stage. The idea that the Great Reset is some sort of new plan because of COVID just can't be right. Private properties were being transferred into institutional investors as well as the state, and that has been ongoing since at least 2010, if not even earlier. Without being called some sort of nut, the Great Reset and the slogan, "You will own nothing and be happy," was introduced to the public around 2020, and probably introduced because it was already too late to do anything about it. It was like now is the time to start slowly changing people's mindsets in regards to ownership of property and start moving people towards the long-term rental model. We are all getting used to the subscription model anyway. Think about it. Why wouldn't institutional investors want to have control of housing? Housing has been one of the main ways families have been able to create wealth in the past. Home ownership has definitely been one of the more secure ways for people to build wealth. There was a time when institutional investors were happy just to lend, buy bonds, and hold commercial property. However, over the last few years, they've started to realize that housing has been one of the most safest assets to hold long term, and they want in. Governments also want in on housing, and there's been a huge drive all around the world for more social housing. And why not? If you control people's housing, you can also control how they vote and control them easier as well. Some governments have even looked to increase their own powers to CPO property from private owners, i.e. the state can force private owners to sell their properties to them. Parties in the Irish government have introduced or proposed bills with this effect, dramatically increasing the government's power to CPO people's private property and not have any clear justification why they're CPOing that property. Similar examples are happening all over the world. The loss of rights and transferring properties started probably back in about 2008, if not earlier. God, Ireland is a great example of this. Developers were stripped of many of their rights in terms of managing their own assets and own loans, and they were forced to deal with NAMA. All their loans were forced into NAMA, even if they were performing loans or not. They were forced to deal with NAMA, and in lots of cases, their loans or properties were taken off them without them having much say in the matter. When the IMF came into Ireland, they introduced local property tax. They also tried to introduce water rates, which were eventually scrapped. The Irish Central Bank and other central banks also introduced stricter lending rules, which was a good thing to make sure the crash of 2008 didn't happen again. However, this did have impacts on people. It had impacts on people in terms of second-time buyers, because they had a 20% deposit requirement in some countries like Ireland. This limited their ability to trade up. It also made it harder for developers to get funding for new builds that they were hoping to sell onto the private market, because mortgages were no longer being granted to buy off plan. This made it very difficult for developers to get funding to build apartment blocks and houses. And the only way they could build a lot of apartments was because they could get funding through institutional investors, because they were going to buy it as a build to rent apartment complex. This is happening all over the world, where developers are not able to get funding for build to sell. They are able to get funding for build to rent because institutions are willing to lend to them to develop these projects out. This is happening in cities all across the world, meaning many of the apartment schemes being built in cities at the moment are only going to be built for rent, making it harder and harder for private buyers to find property and get on the property ladder, and it's likely not going to get any easier. The World Economic Forum, the World Bank, the IMF are all in favour of more uniformed international investment, environment and banking, and they always try to negotiate more favourable rules for international investors when they are lending to different countries. There are lots of pros to this, but there are also some drawbacks to this. Even in June 2020, the IMF agreed a $5 billion loan arrangement with Ukraine. But to qualify for that loan, the Ukraine Parliament had to vote to lift a ban on international investors buying up farmland in Ukraine. They also had to vote on new banking rules within the country as well. So the world is stacked up, or being stacked up against new private home ownership. So what is one to do? Using your vote to try change this might be a little bit too late. Central parties are kind of in favour of institutional investors. The left socialist parties are in favour of state housing. So still no housing for private homeowners. And I think if you look at the far right, perhaps that's going to limit investment altogether. But where can your vote actually count in the future? Well, perhaps trying to improve long-term tenancy rights is one way to go, and as more and more people become renters, that vote is going to get far more powerful, and therefore they will be able to influence legislation in regards to protecting long-term tenants. So don't hate me for this one. If you can't beat them, join them. So this may be easier for some people than others to actually do this, but investing in funds like BlackRock and Blackstone and some other property funds is a way to protect yourself in the future. Many countries like Germany, who have a culture of long-term renting but do have better tenancy rights, invest far more into the stock market and often end up far better off. I don't think investing in property funds is going to be open to everyone. A lot of these funds, particularly in BlackRock and Blackstone and all these larger funds, are pretty much closed off to the average small investor, and sometimes you have to be uber rich to get in or be invited in to invest into it. But I do think changes in technology, including blockchain and tokenization of some properties, will open up some investment opportunities for smaller investors, and I think there is a huge opportunity for smaller investors to get some exposure to the property industry through smaller funds and through tokenization in the long term. There are lots of examples of investing in the stock market long term can actually provide greater wealth than buying a home. What I'm saying is, rather than actually buying a home and using your deposit to buy that home or put a down payment on that home, you use that deposit and down payment to invest in the stock market. Judging by some of the comments that I've got on videos on this topic, a lot of people will ask, well, I own my own home, so they're not going to take it off me, are they? Well, I hope they don't, and I don't think it will come to that. But what I would be worried about is when it comes to your kids or passing it on to your kids down the line, from an inheritance point of view, there will be huge taxes on that, and your kids may not be able to afford to hold on to that home. Other comments that I've got, particularly from US viewers, is that they're going to use their Second Amendment to protect that property. And I can kind of understand that, not with the gun stuff, but I can kind of understand people's desire to protect their property. It is very important to people, and it's very important to people's families. Owning a home has been one of the greatest ways to build wealth, and sometimes build generational wealth as well. And I see why so many people want to hold onto a home and why so many people want to buy a home. But unlike past generations who probably only had one or two opportunities to build generational wealth or invest, The stock market was closed off to past generations. In a lot of cases, it was expensive to use a stockbroker, etc. And for a lot of cases, or a lot of families, the only way they actually did build up generational wealth was through their home and paying down a mortgage. I don't think current generations have the same excuse. I think there's loads of opportunities to invest in all different asset classes from your mobile phone. And I think current generations have to think about it that way. They have to think that, is buying a home the best way for me to create generational wealth or create wealth? Perhaps investing in other stocks and assets is far better or will produce far greater returns long term than a house will. And I think that's the point of this video. I don't think Gen X, etc., millennials, all these people can rely on buying a home to build generational wealth or build wealth. I think they need to take more of an active role in investing for the long term and build long-term wealth through investing. I hope you got something out of this video and hope it gets you thinking about how you can protect your long-term future and how you can build your wealth. If you have, please show your support by liking the video. Make sure you subscribe to the channel as well. There are other links below in the description that you might find useful. And as always, thanks for watching.